The letter trembled in Clara Sinclair's pale hands. The ink smudged from the countless times she'd unfolded and refolded it during the long journey west. The promise of marriage to a respectable man in Colorado Territory had seemed like salvation for a 20-year-old seamstress with no family and mounting debts in Boston. Now, as the stagecoach rattled toward Black Hawk in the spring of 1867, dread replaced hope in her heart. "Last stop before Black Hawk," the driver called out, his voice barely audible over the rumbling wheels and the pounding of hooves. Clara tucked the letter into her pocket and gazed out at the rugged landscape. The Rocky Mountains loomed in the distance, their peaks still capped with snow despite the warming season. She had never seen mountains like these before, so imposing, so wild, just like the territory she was entering. The stagecoach lurched to a halt at a dusty outpost, and Clara stepped down, stretching her legs while the horses were watered. A weathered man with a gray beard nodded at her. "Heading to Black Hawk, miss?" "Yes," she replied, adjusting her bonnet against the bright sunlight. "I'm to meet my fiancé there." The man's expression shifted subtly. "Black Hawk, eh? Mining town. Rough place for a lady." Clara forced a smile. "I'm sure it will be fine. Mr. Blackstone assured me in his letters that he has a comfortable home." The old man merely nodded and turned away, but something in his manner left Clara feeling uneasy. When the stagecoach finally rolled into Black Hawk 2 hours later, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows between the hastily constructed buildings. The main street bustled with activity, miners fresh from their shifts, merchants closing shop, and saloon doors swinging open to welcome the evening crowd. Clara gathered her 2 small valises and stepped down from the coach, her legs unsteady after days of travel. She looked around anxiously for the man who had described himself as distinguished, successful, and eager to provide a good life for a willing bride. Instead, a short, portly man with a receding hairline and ill-fitting suit approached her. His smile revealed tobacco-stained teeth. "Miss Sinclair?" he asked, removing his hat. "Yes," she replied cautiously. "Harold Jenkins at your service. Mr. Blackstone asked me to collect you." Clara's heart sank. "Mr. Blackstone isn't coming himself. Urgent business, I'm afraid. Mining concerns. He's asked me to escort you to your accommodations for tonight." Something felt wrong. In all his letters, Edgar Blackstone had been insistent about meeting her personally. "I'm afraid there must be some mistake." Mr. Blackstone promised. "No mistake, miss," Jenkins interrupted, reaching for her bags. "Everything's been arranged. You'll meet Mr. Blackstone tomorrow." With no other options and night falling, Clara reluctantly followed Jenkins down the muddy street. Instead of heading toward the residential area she could see on the hillside, he led her to a wagon waiting at the edge of town. "Where are we going?" she asked, stopping abruptly. "Just a short journey to where you'll be staying," Jenkins replied smoothly. "The Blackstone mining camp is a few miles outside town." Mining camp. But Mr. Blackstone wrote of a proper house in Black Hawk. Jenkins' smile disappeared. "Plans change, miss. Now, if you'd please." He gestured to the wagon with an impatience that made Clara's skin prickle with fear. 2 other men appeared from the shadows, and Clara realized she had no choice. She climbed into the wagon, clutching her bags to her chest, praying that this was simply a misunderstanding. The journey took nearly an hour along a rough mountain road. When they finally arrived, Clara's heart plummeted. Instead of a proper town, she found herself at a crude mining camp. Dozens of canvas tents and rough wooden structures clustered around the entrance to a mine shaft. Lanterns cast eerie shadows across the scene, and the sounds of drunken laughter echoed from a large tent marked as a saloon. "Welcome to your new home," Jenkins said with a smirk that sent chills down her spine. Clara was escorted to a small cabin at the edge of the camp. Inside, a stern-faced woman named Mrs. Dobbs explained the situation without pretense. "There is no Mr. Blackstone waiting to marry you," she said flatly. "The men pooled their money to bring a woman out here. You'll cook, clean, and see to the men's needs. In return, you'll have shelter and protection." This is kidnapping," Clara gasped, backing toward the door. "I came here to be a wife, not a—" "You came here because you had nowhere else to go," Mrs. Dobbs cut in harshly. "And that's still the case, isn't it? You've no money for a return journey, no family to take you in. The men paid good money for you. Best make your peace with it." Clara spent that night huddled on a thin mattress, too terrified to sleep. She had walked into a trap, and there seemed no way out. The mountains that had appeared so majestic earlier now felt like prison walls. The next morning, Clara was put to work in the camp kitchen, preparing meals for dozens of hungry miners. Her fine city clothes were exchanged for a coarse work dress and apron. Mrs. Dobbs watched her closely, making it clear that escape was impossible. The camp was miles from town, the terrain treacherous, and the men would not take kindly to losing their investment. Days turned into weeks. Clara worked from dawn until well after dusk, cooking, cleaning, mending clothes, anything to keep herself useful and avoid the unwanted attentions of the miners. Most left her alone at Mrs. Dobbs' insistence that Clara was camp property, not individual property, but their leering glances and crude comments made her skin crawl. One evening in late June, the routine changed. The camp was buzzing with excitement. A poker game was planned in the main tent, with visitors from neighboring camps expected. Clara was ordered to serve drinks and keep the men's glasses full. As she moved among the crowded tables, trying to make herself invisible, the tent flap opened to admit a newcomer. He stood taller than most of the miners, his lean frame suggesting strength without bulk. Unlike the unwashed workers, he carried himself with quiet confidence. His dark hair was slightly too long, curling at the collar of his worn but clean shirt. When he removed his hat, Clara glimpsed eyes as blue as the mountain sky. He surveyed the room calmly before taking a seat at one of the poker tables. Clara noticed he chose a position with his back to the wall where he could see the entire tent. "Who is that?" she whispered to Mrs. Dobbs. "Thomas Nightingale," the woman replied with unusual respect in her voice. "Cattle driver. Brings herds through these parts twice a year. Don't get any ideas, girl. He won't be staying." Throughout the evening, Clara found her gaze drawn repeatedly to the stranger. Unlike the miners, he drank sparingly and spoke little, his focus on the cards. Yet she sensed he was aware of everything happening around him, including her. The hours wore on, and the game at Thomas Nightingale's table intensified. Most players had dropped out, leaving only him and Jenkins, who had brought Clara to the camp. The pile of money and valuables between them grew. "I'm out of cash," Jenkins finally declared, his face flushed with drink and frustration. Thomas began to rake in his winnings, but Jenkins stopped him with a raised hand. "Wait, one more hand. I've got something else to wager." "Not interested in your pocket watch or that sorry excuse for a horse you ride," Thomas replied evenly. Jenkins' eyes darted to Clara, and her blood froze. "The girl. I'll wager the girl." Thomas Nightingale's expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted. "The girl isn't yours to wager. She belongs to the camp, and I speak for the camp," Jenkins insisted, emboldened by whiskey and desperation. "One hand. You win, you take her with you when you go. I win, you leave that pile of money on the table." The tent had gone quiet, all eyes on the two men. Clara stood paralyzed, her future hanging in the balance between a drunk miner and a stranger. Thomas Nightingale's gaze found hers across the room. For the first time, she saw emotion in those blue eyes, a flash of anger quickly controlled. "The lady should have a say," he said quietly. Jenkins laughed. "She's not a lady. She's a mail-order bride who got sold short. Now, are you playing or not?" Thomas looked at Clara again, a question in his eyes. Almost imperceptibly, she nodded. Whatever fate awaited her with this stranger, it couldn't be worse than the camp. "Deal the cards," Thomas said. The hand was played in tense silence. When the final card was revealed, Jenkins cursed loudly and slammed his fist on the table. He'd lost. Thomas stood unhurriedly, gathering his winnings. "The lady will need time to collect her belongings." Jenkins, sullen in defeat, waved a dismissive hand. "Take her. She's more trouble than she's worth anyway." Clara hurried to the cabin she shared with Mrs. Dobbs, her heart racing. She had no idea if she'd just escaped one terrible situation only to enter another. But some instinct told her to trust the quiet cowboy. She had few possessions to gather, just the clothes she'd arrived in, now clean but wrinkled, and a small Bible that had belonged to her mother. As she changed out of her work dress, Mrs. Dobbs appeared in the doorway. "You think you're lucky getting out of here?" the older woman asked, her voice neither kind nor cruel. "Men are the same everywhere, girl. This one might seem different, but they all want the same thing in the end." Clara fastened the last button on her traveling dress. "Perhaps, but at least I'll have a chance to find out for myself." When she emerged from the cabin, Thomas Nightingale was waiting with 2 horses, his own sturdy mount, and a smaller mare. "Can you ride?" he asked, the first words he'd spoken directly to her. "Not well," Clara admitted. "But I can learn," he nodded, showing neither impatience nor pity. "We'll take it slow. It's 3 hours to my camp. My men are driving cattle to the northern pastures." As they rode away from the mining camp, Clara expected to feel relief. Instead, anxiety gnawed at her. She was alone in the wilderness with a man she knew nothing about. "Mr. Nightingale," she began hesitantly, "I'm grateful for your intervention back there, but I should tell you that I have no intention of. That is, I won't." "Miss Sinclair," he interrupted calmly, "I didn't win you to replace one form of servitude with another. Once we reach Black Hawk, you're free to go wherever you choose. I can provide funds for your journey." Clara stared at him in surprise. "How do you know my name?" A slight smile touched his lips. "I asked around when I first saw you serving drinks. Your situation was discussed among the men." Heat flooded her cheeks. "And you decided to rescue me. Why?" His gaze remained fixed on the trail ahead. "No one deserves to be treated as property. I was simply in a position to do something about it." They rode in silence after that, Clara struggling to reconcile this quiet, honorable man with everything she'd come to expect from men in the West. As promised, Thomas's camp was a few hours' ride from the mining settlement. Unlike the chaotic, dirty mining camp, his cattle drive setup was orderly and well-maintained. 6 cowboys sat around a large campfire, looking up with surprise when Thomas rode in with Clara. "Boys," Thomas said by way of greeting, "this is Miss Sinclair. She'll be traveling with us for a while." The men scrambled to their feet, removing hats and nodding respectfully. Clara was startled by their deference, so different from the miners' crude leers. An older cowboy with weathered features approached. "Madam, I'm Sam, cook and foreman when the boss is away. We don't have proper accommodations for a lady, but we'll do our best to make you comfortable." "Thank you," Clara replied, suddenly aware of how disheveled she must look after weeks in the mining camp and hours on horseback. Sam led her to a small tent set slightly apart from where the men slept under the stars. Inside was a bedroll on a ground sheet, a lantern, and a basin of water. "It ain't much," Sam apologized, "but it's clean. Boss says you're to have privacy. Any man bothers you, you tell me or him straight away." Left alone, Clara washed her face and hands, then sat on the bedroll, overwhelmed by the day's events. Outside, she could hear the low murmur of men's voices and the occasional laugh. It should have frightened her to be alone with 7 men in the wilderness, but somehow she felt safer than she had in weeks. A soft cough outside her tent drew her attention. "Miss Sinclair, I've brought you some supper if you're hungry." It was Thomas Nightingale. Clara realized she was famished. She hadn't eaten since breakfast at the mining camp. "Yes, please," she called, smoothing her hair and dress as best she could. He entered, ducking his tall frame beneath the tent flap, and handed her a tin plate heaped with beans, beef, and biscuits. "Not exactly fine dining," he said with a hint of apology. "It looks wonderful," she assured him. And it did after weeks of watery stew and hard bread at the mining camp. This simple trail food seemed a feast. Thomas lingered awkwardly for a moment. "We'll reach Black Hawk by midday tomorrow." "The stagecoach east leaves every Thursday." Clara set down her fork. "Mr. Nightingale, I don't know where to go. I have no family, no home to return to." "What brought you west in the first place?" Clara explained about the advertisement she'd answered, the correspondence with the fictional Mr. Blackstone, and her desperate situation in Boston after her parents' deaths had left her with debts she couldn't pay. Thomas listened without interruption. When she finished, he said simply, "You're welcome to travel with us until you decide what you want to do. We'll be driving the herd north for another month before heading back to my ranch near Denver." "I wouldn't want to impose. You wouldn't be," he cut in gently. "The men could use some civilized company for a change, but I understand if you'd prefer town life." Clara thought of the bustling streets of Black Hawk she'd glimpsed briefly before being taken to the mining camp. The prospect of being alone there, vulnerable to another deception, made her shudder. "I'd like to stay," she decided. "At least for now. I can earn my keep. I'm a good cook and I can mend clothing." Thomas nodded. "Get some rest, Miss Sinclair. Dawn comes early on the trail." In the days that followed, Clara adapted to life with the cattle drive. She rose before the sun with the cowboys, helped Sam prepare meals, and spent hours in the saddle as they moved the herd northward through the Colorado Territory. Her city's soft hands grew calloused, her fair skin tanned despite the bonnet she wore. The cowboys, initially awkward around her, gradually relaxed, treating her with a rough courtesy that warmed her heart. They taught her to ride properly, cheering her progress and teasing her good-naturedly when she made mistakes. In the evenings, they shared stories around the campfire, careful to clean up their language in her presence. Thomas Nightingale remained something of a mystery. He was unfailingly polite and respectful, but maintained a certain distance. Clara often caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. He spoke little of himself, though the men's comments gradually painted a picture. Thomas had come west as a young man, worked as a cowhand, saved carefully, and eventually bought his own small ranch. Through hard work and smart decisions, he'd built it into a respectable operation with prime grazing lands and a growing herd. One evening, as the cattle settled for the night and the men finished their supper, the youngest cowboy, Billy, pulled out a harmonica and began to play. The melancholy tune drifted across the camp, stirring something in Clara's heart. She hadn't heard music since leaving Boston. "You dance, Miss Sinclair?" Thomas asked, appearing suddenly beside her. Clara looked up, startled. Yes, though it's been some time." He extended his hand. "Would you do me the honor?" Aware of the cowboy's grins, Clara placed her hand in Thomas's. He led her a little away from the fire, then drew her into a simple waltz. For a man who spent his days in the saddle, he moved with surprising grace. "Where did a cowboy learn to dance?" she asked as they circled slowly. A smile tugged at his lips. "My mother insisted, said no son of hers would grow up a complete savage." "She sounds like a wise woman." "She was," he replied, a shadow crossing his face. "She died when I was 15, fever." "I'm sorry," Clara said softly. "I lost my parents 3 years ago. It doesn't stop hurting, does it?" His blue eyes met hers with unexpected warmth. "No, but it becomes bearable." They danced in silence after that, the connection between them shifting subtly. When Billy's tune ended, Thomas stepped back, but his hand lingered on hers a moment longer than necessary. "Thank you for the dance, Miss Sinclair," he said formally, but his eyes conveyed something more. That night, Clara lay awake in her tent, confused by the emotions stirring within her. She'd come west seeking security, not romance. Thomas Nightingale was kind and honorable qualities she'd found rare in men, but she barely knew him. And yet, the following days brought new awareness. Clara found herself noticing small things about Thomas: the gentleness with which he treated his horse, the patience he showed teaching her to read trail signs, the quiet authority he commanded without ever raising his voice. In turn, she felt his attention on her when she laughed with the cowboys or sang softly while mending shirts. Their conversations grew longer, more personal. Thomas spoke of his dreams for his ranch, his hopes to expand the house he'd built himself, to plant orchards and create something lasting. Clara shared memories of her childhood in Boston, her love of books, her skill with needle and thread. 2 weeks into the journey, they made camp near a clear mountain stream. While the cowboys tended the herd, Clara seized the opportunity to wash properly for the first time in days. Finding a secluded bend in the stream screened by willows, she removed her dusty clothes and stepped into the cold water, gasping at the shock. She had just finished washing her hair when a sound made her turn. Thomas stood frozen at the edge of the willows, clearly having stumbled upon her accidentally. For one suspended moment, their eyes met hers wide with surprise, his darkening with an emotion that made her breath catch. "Forgive me," he said roughly, turning away abruptly. I was just—" "It's all right," Clara called, sinking deeper into the water. "It was an accident." He disappeared among the trees, but the moment lingered. That evening they both maintained a careful distance, their conversation stilted when they spoke at all. The following morning, everything changed. Clara woke to shouting and the sound of gunfire. She scrambled from her tent to find the camp in chaos. 3 men on horseback were driving off part of the herd while the cowboys scrambled for weapons. "Rustlers!" Sam shouted, catching sight of her. "Get back in your tent, Miss Clara." But before she could move, one of the rustlers spotted her. He changed direction, galloping toward the camp with a predatory grin. Clara froze in terror as the man reached down from his horse, clearly intending to grab her. A shot cracked through the air. The rustler's horse reared, and the man tumbled to the ground, clutching his shoulder. Thomas Nightingale stood 20 yards away, rifle raised, his expression cold as steel. "Touch her and the next one goes through your heart," he called, his voice deadly calm. The other rustlers, seeing their companion down and the cowboys now armed, abandoned their attempt and fled with only a few cattle. The wounded man staggered to his feet, glaring at Thomas. "This ain't over, Nightingale," he spat, backing toward his skittish horse. "It is for today," Thomas replied evenly. "Ride out and don't come back." The man mounted awkwardly and galloped after his companions. Only when they disappeared into the distance did Thomas lower his rifle and turn to Clara. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice gentle now, concern replacing the cold fury she'd witnessed moments before. "No," she managed, though she was shaking. "You saved me. He shook his head. I put you in danger by bringing you here. I should have known Bennett's gang might try something. You know them. Thomas's jaw tightened. Frank Bennett. He's been causing trouble for ranchers in these parts for years. I testified against his brother last year in Denver, got him sent to prison for murder. Sam joined them, his weathered face grim. They'll be back, boss, with more men next time. Thomas nodded. We need to change our route. Head west through the high country, then circle back north. It'll add a week to our journey, but it's safer. The camp was packed quickly, and by mid-morning they were traveling along a steeper, more rugged trail that wound up into the mountains. Clara rode beside Thomas, still shaken by the morning's events. I'm sorry, she said after they'd been riding in silence for an hour. I've brought trouble to you and your men. Thomas glanced at her, his expression softening. The trouble was already there, Miss Sinclair. Bennett's been looking for revenge since the trial, but I am sorry you had to experience it. Clara, she said impulsively. He raised an eyebrow. Please call me Clara. After everything we've been through, Miss Sinclair seems unnecessarily formal. A smile touched his lips. Clara, then. And I'm Thomas. The new route took them through breathtaking mountain scenery, towering pines, meadows bright with wildflowers, and crystal-clear lakes that reflected the sky. Despite the circumstances that had forced them here, Clara found herself entranced by the beauty. They made camp that evening in a sheltered valley. After supper, Thomas asked Clara to walk with him to a nearby ridge. As the sun set, painting the mountains gold and crimson, he turned to her with unusual hesitation. Clara, I need to tell you something. I haven't been entirely forthcoming about my situation. Her heart sank. Was he married? A fugitive? Her mind raced with possibilities. My ranch near Denver, it's more than just a cattle operation. My father was an investor in the Transcontinental Railroad before he died. He left me shares that have become valuable. I've used that money to expand the ranch, build a proper home. He paused. I'm not a wealthy man by Eastern standards, but I'm comfortable. I could offer a woman a good life. Clara stared at him, confused by this revelation. Why are you telling me this? Thomas ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of uncharacteristic nervousness. Because I don't want you to think I'm like Jenkins or the men at that mining camp. I didn't win you in that card game to own you, but I've grown to care for you, Clara. More than I expected to. Her pulse quickened. Thomas, you don't need to say anything, he hurried on. I know you came west under false pretenses and found something far worse than you bargained for. The last thing you need is another man making claims on your future. I just wanted you to know that when we reach Denver, you have options. You could stay, not as an obligation, but because you choose to. Clara looked up at this man who had rescued her, protected her, and now was offering her freedom along with his heart. In his blue eyes she saw not possession but possibility. I think, she said carefully, that I would like to see this ranch of yours. The smile that transformed his face made her heart skip. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Thomas bent his head and kissed her. His lips were gentle against hers, asking rather than demanding. Clara found herself responding with a passion that surprised them both. When they finally broke apart, breathless, Thomas rested his forehead against hers. I've wanted to do that since the night we danced, he admitted. Clara smiled. I've wanted you to. They returned to camp hand in hand, their new understanding visible to all. The cowboys exchanged knowing glances but said nothing. The following week brought challenges: steep terrain that slowed their progress, a summer storm that soaked everyone to the skin, and the constant vigilance against Bennett's return. But for Clara, these hardships were offset by deepening feelings for Thomas. Each evening brought conversations that revealed more of the man behind the quiet exterior, his dry humor, his deep sense of justice, his dreams for the future. 10 days after changing their route, they descended from the high country and rejoined their planned trail north. The danger from Bennett seemed to have passed, and the mood in camp lightened. Clara had fully integrated into the rhythm of trail life, her city ways replaced by practical skills and a newfound confidence. One evening, as they sat together watching the sunset, Thomas took her hand. "We'll reach the northern pasture in 3 days. From there, Sam and the boys can handle the herd. I thought perhaps you and I might ride to Denver." Clara felt a flutter of anticipation. "To your ranch?" "Yes," he hesitated. "Clara, I know it's soon, we've known each other barely a month, but I find I can't imagine my life without you now." She squeezed his hand. "Nor I without you. Then would you?" He cleared his throat. "Would you consider becoming my wife? Not right away if you don't wish it. You could stay at the ranch, get to know the place, make sure it's the life you want." Clara considered his words. A month ago, she had been desperate enough to travel across the country to marry a stranger. Now, against all odds, she'd found a man whose character she respected, whose company she enjoyed, and whose touch made her heart race. "I don't need more time," she said softly. "I know who I want." The journey to Denver took 4 days, with Clara and Thomas riding ahead while Sam led the cattle drive to the northern pastures. They traveled at an easy pace, no longer constrained by the slow-moving herd. Thomas pointed out landmarks, shared stories of his early days in the territory, and spoke with growing enthusiasm about the home that awaited them. Denver in 1867 was a rapidly growing city, bustling with the energy of the West's expansion. Clara's first glimpse of it, with its mix of substantial brick buildings and hastily constructed wooden structures, reminded her that civilization wasn't as distant as it had sometimes seemed on the trail. They spent one night in a hotel, in separate rooms that Thomas insisted upon despite their engagement. "When we marry," he told her with a smile that made her blush, "I want everything to be proper." The following morning, they visited a dress shop where Thomas insisted on buying Clara several new outfits to replace her trail-worn clothes. Though initially reluctant to accept such generosity, she eventually relented, delighting in the feel of fresh fabric and properly fitting garments. They left Denver by mid-afternoon, heading southeast toward Thomas's ranch. As the miles passed, Clara noticed the landscape changing, becoming more lush, with stands of cottonwoods along creek beds and rolling hills covered in grass. "Most of this land is mine," Thomas told her as they crested a hill. "From that fence line to the creek, and all the way to those distant bluffs." Clara stared in amazement. The property was vast, dotted with grazing cattle and bisected by a clear stream. And there, nestled against a backdrop of hills, stood a house, not the crude cabin she had expected, but a proper 2-story home with a wide porch and glass windows that caught the late afternoon sun. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Thomas's expression was a mixture of pride and uncertainty. "I built it thinking of a family someday. Is it? Will it suit you?" Clara turned to him, eyes shining. "It's more than I ever dreamed of." As they approached, a woman emerged from a smaller cabin nearby. She waved enthusiastically, then hurried to meet them. "You're back early, Mr. Nightingale," she called. "And with company." "Mrs. Fletcher," Thomas greeted her, dismounting and helping Clara from her horse. "This is Miss Clara Sinclair, my fiancée. Clara, Mrs. Fletcher keeps house for me and makes sure everything runs smoothly when I'm away." The older woman's face lit up with delight. "A fiancé? Well, bless my soul, it's about time, Mr. Nightingale. The place needs a woman's touch, no offense to your building skills, of course." Clara liked the housekeeper immediately. "Mrs. Fletcher's warm welcome and obvious affection for Thomas spoke volumes about his character. Inside, the house revealed Thomas's attention to detail and quality. The furniture was solid and well-crafted, the room spacious and thoughtfully arranged. A bookshelf in the parlor held several dozen volumes, a luxury Clara hadn't expected. "My mother was a teacher," Thomas explained, noticing her interest in the books. "Reading was important to her. I try to get to Denver a few times a year to buy new titles." That evening, after Mrs. Fletcher had prepared a welcome home supper that far surpassed anything they'd eaten on the trail, Clara and Thomas sat on the porch watching fireflies dance in the gathering dusk. "Are you happy?" Thomas asked quietly. "Is it what you hoped for?" Clara leaned against his shoulder. "It's more. When I left Boston, I was desperate enough to marry a stranger for security. I never expected to find love." His arm tightened around her. "Nor I. I've been so focused on building this ranch, I never took time to consider what was missing from my life, until I saw you in that mining camp. I still can't believe you risked so much money on a poker game for a woman you didn't know." Thomas smiled. "Best wager I ever made." They were married 2 weeks later in Denver, with Sam and the Cowboys attending in their Sunday best, along with Mrs. Fletcher and a few of Thomas's neighbors. Clara wore a new dress of pale blue silk, with wildflowers in her hair instead of a veil. The ceremony was simple but meaningful, the celebration afterward joyful. That night, as husband and wife, they discovered each other in ways both tender and passionate. Clara, who had feared this aspect of marriage during her time at the mining camp, found only delight in Thomas's gentle touches and whispered endearments. Summer flowed into autumn, and Clara settled into her role as mistress of the ranch. She added feminine touches to the house curtains she sewed herself, a garden plot for vegetables and flowers, jars of preserves lining the pantry shelves. She learned to manage the household accounts, to treat minor injuries, to identify the ranch's cattle by their brands. Thomas watched her transformation from city girl to rancher's wife with admiration. "You've taken to this life better than I dared hope," he told her one evening as they sat before the fire. Clara smiled. "I've found where I belong, with you." Their happiness faced one significant challenge that winter. Frank Bennett, the rustler who had threatened Thomas during the cattle drive, returned with 6 men. They struck at night, setting fire to one of the outlying barns and driving off a dozen horses. Thomas and his ranch hands rode out in pursuit, leaving Clara and Mrs. Fletcher anxiously waiting at the house. Hours stretched into a day, then 2. Clara paced the porch, straining to hear hoofbeats that would signal their return. When they finally appeared on the 3rd day, Clara's relief turned to fear as she saw Thomas slumped in the saddle, supported by Sam. She ran to meet them, heart in her throat. "He'll be all right, Mrs. Nightingale," Sam assured her as they carefully helped Thomas down. "Took a bullet in the shoulder, but we got it out clean." Thomas, pale but conscious, managed a weak smile. "We got the horses back, and Bennett won't be troubling anyone again." Clara didn't ask for details. She focused on nursing her husband back to health, changing bandages, brewing willow bark tea for pain, and reading to him during the long hours of recovery. By spring, Thomas's wound had healed completely, leaving only a scar to remind them of the danger they'd faced. As the ranch flourished, so did their love. A year after their wedding, Clara discovered she was expecting their first child. Thomas's joy was boundless. He immediately began expanding the house, adding a nursery adjacent to their bedroom. "Boy or girl, this child will have everything we can give," he vowed, his hand gentle on Clara's growing belly. Their son, James Thomas Nightingale, was born on a crisp autumn day in 1869. He had his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined spirit. From his earliest days, he was the center of their world, adored not only by his parents but by Mrs. Fletcher, Sam, and all the cowboys who treated him like a collective nephew. 2 years later, Clara gave birth to twin girls, Sarah and Elizabeth, completing their family. The nursery Thomas had built was soon filled with laughter, toys, and the chaos of 3 energetic children. The ranch prospered alongside their family. Thomas's careful management and investment in quality breeding stock paid dividends, allowing them to purchase additional land and build a larger barn. Clara started a small side business selling her intricate needlework to shops in Denver, finding satisfaction in contributing to the family's success while using skills from her former life. In the spring of 1875, 8 years after Clara had first stepped off the stagecoach in Black Hawk, an unexpected visitor arrived at the ranch. Mrs. Fletcher showed the stranger into the parlor where Clara was helping 6-year-old James with his reading. "Madam, there's a Mr. Jenkins here to see you," the housekeeper announced with obvious disapproval. Clara looked up, startled to find Harold Jenkins standing awkwardly in the doorway. He was thinner than she remembered, his clothes threadbare, his once confident demeanor replaced by hesitation. "Miss Sinclair," he began, then corrected himself. "Mrs. Nightingale, I hope I'm not intruding." Clara sent her son to find his sisters. When the children had left, she faced Jenkins coolly. "What brings you here, Mr. Jenkins?" "I wanted to." He twisted his hat in his hands. "That is, I felt I should apologize for what happened at the mining camp. I've had some reverses of fortune since then. Makes a man think about the wrongs he's done." Before Clara could respond, Thomas entered the room. He recognized Jenkins immediately, his expression hardening. "You have a lot of nerve coming here," he said quietly. Jenkins nodded. "I know. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted to say my piece and be gone." He turned back to Clara. "The camp's gone now. Mine played out 3 years back. Most of the men scattered. Mrs. Dobbs passed on last winter." Clara felt a surprising pang at this news. Despite the woman's harshness, she had shown occasional kindness during Clara's time at the camp. "I'm sorry to hear that," she said softly. Jenkins nodded. "Anyway, I'm heading to California. Thought I'd set things right before I go." Clara looked at Thomas, seeing the tension in his jaw, the protectiveness in his stance. But she also recognized the man she'd married: fair, compassionate, unwilling to hold grudges when genuine repentance was offered. "We appreciate you coming by," she said carefully. "The past is behind us, Mr. Jenkins. I hope you find what you're looking for in California." Relief washed over Jenkins's face. He nodded to Thomas, who gave a curt nod in return, then made his exit. They watched from the porch as he rode away, a solitary figure against the vast landscape. "You're a better person than I am," Thomas said, wrapping his arm around Clara's waist. "I'm not sure I could have been so gracious." Clara leaned into his embrace. "What happened at that camp led me to you. It's hard to hold on to anger when the outcome has brought such happiness." As if summoned by their voices, their children burst from the house, clamoring for attention. James wanted to show his father a new trick he'd taught his pony. The twins insisted their mother come see the kittens they'd discovered in the barn. Clara and Thomas exchanged a smile before allowing themselves to be pulled in different directions by eager small hands. This was the life they had built together, rich with love, secure in its foundation, far removed from the desperate circumstances that had first brought them together. That evening, after the children were asleep, Clara and Thomas sat on their porch as they had so many nights before, watching the stars emerge in the vast Colorado sky. Thomas took her hand, his thumb tracing the simple gold band he'd placed there 8 years earlier. "You ever regret it?" he asked. Answering that advertisement, coming west, Clara considered the journey that had brought her here from a desperate young woman fleeing debts in Boston, to a mail-order bride sold to a mining camp, to a woman won in a card game by a quiet cowboy. Never, she replied, meaning it with all her heart. Every step, even the painful ones, led me where I was meant to be. Thomas pulled her close, his kiss as tender as the first they'd shared on that mountain ridge years ago. I thank God every day for whatever courage or desperation brought you west, and for the hand of cards that brought you to me. Clara smiled against his lips. The best wager you ever made, and the only one that mattered, he whispered. Together they watched the moon rise over the land. They had made their own a kingdom built on second chances, unexpected love, and the promise kept between a mail-order bride and the cowboy who had won her heart along with that fateful hand of cards.